Welcome to the Trees and Lines podcast, where we discuss fresh perspectives on utility vegetation management. Don't forget to follow along on LinkedIn for the latest news. Now, let's dive into this week's episode. Well, welcome to another episode of the Trees and Lines podcast. Today, we welcome Brian Sprinkle, sitting in as a host for Tej Singh, and Mariclaire Rigby from National Grid. Welcome, Mariclaire.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Very good. Mariclaire, why don't you start us off by giving us a little bit of background on yourself and your role there at National Grid?
Sure, happy to do that. So I'm actually a principal vegetation strategy specialist at National Grid. When I started out back in 2005, I always say that I got my job because of the blackout. So in August 2003 was the Northeast blackout, and 2 years later there was a requirement that we had to start patrolling right-of-ways annually. So I ended up getting a job with National Grid in upstate New York, patrolling, central New York and the Adirondacks as a field consultant, and did that for many years. And, I was paid to hike. It's probably, one of the best jobs you can ask for in this field. And then I slowly moved my way up, got, a supervisor position overseeing crews and field work, and then moved on to the strategy side probably about 10 years ago, doing the planning, the permitting, all the regulatory stuff, trying keep our crews and everybody, working by getting all the permits straight for each state, and then regulatory wise, trying to keep everybody in the straight and narrow so that we can comply. And then eventually became the principal specialist.
Very good. My career started in the Adirondacks as well.
There you go.
Yeah, quick follow-up to that. In terms of the regulatory space, what changes in your career have you seen just on the perception or viewpoints of vegetation management in general in regards to the regulators and external stakeholders at that level?
Yeah, so at the federal level, there hasn't been a whole lot of change with FAC 003 over the years. There's been changes in the version, but the core of it has been, really getting your eyes on the right-of-way at least once every 18 months. What has, I think, advanced is how we do that. So definitely when we started out, it was you walk the right of way and you write down on paper what you found, and then you give that to crews to do the work. And then, as things have advanced, we've been able to use LiDAR has especially been our biggest advancement. We now do our patrols with LiDAR annually. We did a good comparison comparing having consultants go out, walk down the right of way versus having LiDAR. And, obviously, you definitely still need people on the right of way. There's no doubt about that, because you'll never get that 360 view of a tree. But being able to, really pinpoint some areas with the LiDAR so they can concentrate on has been a real change for us, and definitely an improvement. Getting a 3D view, if you will, of the right of way has really helped us, hone in on areas that we need to concentrate on even more than we thought before. So for us, regulation wise, at first it was a lot to take on, obviously, trying to do these patrols, but in reality, it's really helped us really get eyes on the right of way, whether it's physical eyes or LiDAR eyes, to see what's going on out there. And, through this, the other part of it is you've been able to see the change in growth through the years, because you're constantly out there checking on the right of way, seeing what's out there, seeing the changes, whether it be from the weather or from, the land use type the landowners might want to still do with the right of way. For us in New England, on our transmission right of ways, they are mainly easements. So we have to work, we have the right to do our work, but we also have to respect the fact that that land is owned by a landowner. So we try to work together, to get it to a point where they can still utilize it for what they need to do, but we also need to keep the lights on and keep the trees clear.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. Oh, and on the topic of growth, and if you you may have mentioned this a second ago, but when did you guys start the LiDAR program?
So we dabbled in it. So engineering first started with it with our company. Yeah. And we tried to, work with some of their data. Obviously, engineering has different requirements than veg. Mm-hmm. A couple of times, we did it together, and it was okay. You kind of had to work things out. The one thing I discovered with LiDAR is no matter what, your first couple of years, you're not going to get exactly what you want for deliverables, because it's really, there's a learning curve, and you really need to kind of figure out exactly what you want. And you have to explain that to the vendor in a way that they can understand, but really going through it a couple of years is, in my opinion, the only way that you're really going to get to the point that you need to be. So for us, engineering has a much higher requirement. So like even the points per square meter, they need more than we need on veg. So we discovered for us, like engineering, they might want to do by helicopter. We discovered we could actually do it by fixed wing. So a little less points per meter, but at the same time, also cheaper. And for us, it was enough of a quality that we could still get what we need to get that, point cloud captured, and for us to, really figure out those air gaps, those spaces between the trees and the wires.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, that's fascinating. And that's what I've typically seen in the industry too, is that, we try to shoehorn the vegetation requirements out of an engineering grade LiDAR scan. And they are, to your point, almost separate scopes of work because of the focus, the point cloud density, the amount of processing data, and then setting up the ecosystem to be able to capture what those two instances are requiring. It's just different. So yeah, we're seeing kind of some utility players going the route of sole sourcing for all, and some of them are segregating those LiDAR scans out because of the nuances you just described. So
yeah, and like on the veg side, we're managing an asset that grows, obviously.
Yes, a living asset.
Right. So engineering is not growing, but so we need the data in a faster turnaround. So we're to the point now between 4 to 6 weeks, we're definitely getting our data from flight capture. And that's been a game changer for us because we now plan that out. Our consultants can go out with that data, mark up locations for crews on their tablets, but at the same time, they could be inventorying, doing a field survey or a review of last year's work. So we've been able to really, mesh it into our program really well.
Yeah, and it's a good source of truth.
I understand.
Did something occur?
I understand you're a drone pilot now. How are you using them? Tell us a little bit about the training.
I am. Yeah. So just at the end of October, I got my commercial drone license. It was definitely something new. The company is utilizing drones more, and it's kind of a mixed bag as to what they're using it for. But we were told, if you would like to get your drone license, we'll support you in getting your drone license. So I said, hey, that's something new. Let's try it out. So I did the course, and then you have to go and take your exam at an airport. So I took it at a local airport in Keene, New Hampshire. And it was definitely, I wouldn't say it was the easiest test because it was totally something new, a topic that really, when you take something like utility specialist exam, you at least have a base in your knowledge. When I went to take the drone exam, this was like really all new topic for me. But it's actually really interesting because as I learn more about things and regulations in the FAA, it kind of now makes more sense. And I've only been able to go out a couple of times. We also, because on top of that, internally, we have more training that a company requires before anyone can fly it on the right of way. So yeah, we're slowly just developing as to what our use cases are. It's great for obviously imagery capturing, before and after on capital construction work. I would eventually like to use it for some sort of review of the right of way for like efficacy of herbicides, but we're definitely not to that point yet. But, I think this can evolve. I don't know, it's something fun to do as well. Something new to learn at this stage is not a bad thing.
And to make the job easier,
yeah,
in
hopefully.
Some of these remote areas, especially up in your neck of the woods, because it's pretty rugged terrain.
Yeah, there's definitely parts of it. And like right now we still have 2 feet of snow on the ground. So there's some areas that, a drone could make things easier because you can only get trampled through, struggle through brush with snowshoes on for so long. So sometimes the drone helps out.
On the drone topic, are you just utilizing high-res imagery that's attached to the drone, or do you have any additional sensors like infrared, multispectral, hyperspectral, LiDAR scanners? They've really made those drone friendly here in the last 5 years.
They're definitely available on some drones. We are using very specific drones made in the U.S. And for our company that they don't currently, the ones we have don't have that capability. But I think as, we evolve with it, we'll probably move into that frame. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of options. The video does help for some things. We've even thrown out the idea, does it make sense to video, for pre-bid work? Does that help the vendors to see that work? Or does it make them sick from watching a video, from seeing that work? Who knows? So yeah, there's definitely, like you said, options out there.
Mariclaire, I came across an article of yours from a while back, and I believe at that time, National Grid had set up some goals for improvement of environmental quality of your rights of way. So I probably didn't say that right, but can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. No, this is kind of one of the exciting projects that I like that we've worked on. So this all probably started about 10 years ago in reality, when, all of us, all the foresters on the system, we all have natural resource degrees, right? So when we're walking down the right of way, we can see the biodiversity in the right of way. And, as we're planning work, we know it's there, but we start saying, well, why aren't we capturing this information? Because the public perception of what we do on the right of way is very mixed, and a lot of it's negative, right? But we know that we're helping rare, threatened, and endangered species. We know the steps that we're taking, the extra steps we're taking to manage the right of way so that it is a sustainable environment. But we're not very good at publicizing that, right? So for National Grid, we've been using IVM, Integrated Vegetation Management, on the right of way since the 1960s. So we have a lot of data as to how much the type of work we've done on the right of way. The study started out where, okay, we want to do a survey. We'll set plots up we had about 15 different areas to start. It's evolved significantly since then, but we want to track the data in the spring, summer, and fall between plant species and insect species and what's on the right of way. And at first we just thought, okay, let's just do surveys and let's see what we get year on year. But in all honesty, we started 5 years ago where we actually started capturing the data. That's how it started out. It has evolved significantly since then, because we found out there's a lot we could do with that data. Some of it being we've managed to change our spec because we're starting to see a little more a change in the compatibles, incompatibles. We're seeing, the change in some vines that are making appearances in our right-of-ways that had not been there before, some invasives. So it's helped us really gather a lot of information and in many ways improve the program. So we managed to add certain species into our spec that previously the vendors would have walked past treating. But now we're saying, no, we're actually beginning to find these are species that we need to treat. They're no longer compatible. So that's been a big change for us. But also, we're noticing just the habitat on the right of way more than anything else. If we were to just go down and mow the right of way, that really disrupts any sort of habitat and causes really habitat fragmentation on the right of way. And we don't do a lot of mowing on our right of ways. We would rather, remove the tall growing species, keep that shrub layer where we can. But there's areas where, whether by local regulation, they have restrictions on use of herbicides. And so maybe we can only mow in those areas. But sometimes, as we do this study, we're beginning to educate more people about our IVM program and actually the benefits of it. So it started out as a survey. We managed to update our spec based on some of the data. We've actually now had community meetings, local meetings with conservation groups on the right of way to show them what's actually happening on the right of way. What they see is, crews just coming in and doing tree removals. Okay, that's not all that's going on the right of way. Let's actually show you the plants that we have on the right of way and what we've brought back on the right of way. So we've managed to bring quite a few groups out in the right of way, and a couple more are still asking to meet us on the right of way and bring local conservation groups there to show them, what do we mean by IVM? It's not just crews with, spray rigs. IVM means multiple techniques, and we're really taking advantage of that. As we move further and forward on the study, we're realizing we can talk about habitat quality class. And maybe, in Europe, a lot of areas use that. And maybe that's something that we're thinking maybe we could start using here. If we give a scoring of 1 to 5 on the areas. So those poorer areas, what do we need to do to bring them up to, at least a 3 or a 4? So yeah, it's definitely, the study's evolved over the years, and we're quite proud of it, to be quite honest.
As you should be. That's
Good.
That's phenomenal. Not a lot of utilities have went down that path to really understand the granularity of the ecosystems and biomes that they're managing. The more you know about that, and to your point about IVM, I think that there's a misconception that a lot of people think IVM is just herbicide or whatever the case may be, like a tool that's in the toolbox, but it's really a culmination of all the different tools and opportunities you have at your disposal and applying them directly to that space to get the best outcome. And understanding the species demographic, et cetera, really sets that framework for what do we do next, where are we at, and where do we want to go long term. So it's really fascinating here. You mentioned some of the incompatibles or compatible species becoming incompatible. Are you guys seeing a big shift in environmental demographics, if you will, or environmental types that are moving up and down the right of way? And is that, I know that climate change is a topic of conversation. However, it's happening is up to the viewers to understand and figure out. But it is happening to some degree because you're starting to see change. And how is that impacting your long-term strategy for those different things happening?
Yeah, so I mean, like you said, some of the what we in some areas we've done the IVM work a little too well, and so now the shrub layer is so significant, right?
Yeah,
That
which also causes another problem with accessibility. Yeah,
exactly. So we still have to manage for accessibility, but at the same time, some like for example, buckthorn. Buckthorn
yes.
in the past has been one that you could kind of leave, and it was good at overshadowing some tall growing species. But now it's actually to the point where it's actually becoming a clearance issue. So we actually are going to remove it in the wire zone. And then some others, I guess I would say like vines we're starting to see. Quite honestly, some we're new to identify. We hadn't seen them before. They're starting to travel up from the south, which
hopefully
is
not kudzu, right?
Yeah, hopefully not. That's one I
Okay,
certainly
good.
never want to see here.
No.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's an evolution of what's going to happen, and whether it's from climate change or what, that's for people with more science degrees than me to really figure out. But I like finding out about the data and what changes we're seeing, and what do we do about it?
Yeah, and with that additional species change and biome changes, comes more growth, and more growth means more maintenance, and more maintenance means more funding to be able to keep what you've already reclaimed and are maintaining now. So it's definitely a good data point to bring up, and the data that you're collecting through these surveys is critical, I'm assuming, for regulatory discussions and also public engagement.
Yes, most definitely. I think the public engagement part is huge. Like I said, not just National Grid, but most utilities are not good about promoting the good stuff we do on the right of way. So, talking about this more, talking about habitat quality, talking about, the change in species that we're seeing, I think we need to do it more in order for people to understand that we're not just out there, spraying or cutting whatever we feel like. We're actually looking at the silence. And not only that, like the crews that we're utilizing, they want to know what they're looking at. They want to know the benefits. So like for us, being able to talk about our study with the crews and telling them, we got to this point where we are with IVM because of what you're doing, because you're IDing the plants properly, because you're taking care of the right of way. We're at this point because of you. And I think it gives ownership to folks that are maintaining the right of way. And they really need to hear about that data.
Yeah, absolutely. The more informed your workforce is, the more educated they are, the more effective they are at maintaining and the goals that you're set forth.
So I'm sure when the public sees you spraying, they respond in a variety of ways. Do you train the crews to talk to them about it, or how do you handle that? How do you communicate that to the public?
For the way it works I cover Mass, New Hampshire, and Vermont. And so under our regulatory permits, there's multiple ways that we communicate with the landowners and the public. So we send landowners letters notifying them of our upcoming work. Newspaper ads go out explaining what we're doing. That's a regulatory requirement. And that does have my name, my number, and my email. So I do get lots of calls and emails, which is good and bad. But you know what? I was just talking to a landowner yesterday, and I said, I'm glad you called because I would rather you ask questions than make assumptions. And so we kind of went through our program. And by then she's like, okay, I understand this now. And, it's actually not going to impact her at all. But now she understands better what we're actually doing. And I think it's a good opportunity for us to educate. But at the same time, our crews are the ones that are most likely going to interact the most with those in the public. So we actually hold an annual training. And part of that training is how to talk to landowners, how to talk to the public. They are that first line of defense, if you will. Them being educated about what they're doing makes a big difference. Simple things like if they have to go knock on a door, take a step back off the step, make sure you're not wearing sunglasses, blocking your eyes, make sure you have your ID out, and then you can talk to them about what we're doing there. The nice thing is we have been doing cycles now, since the 1960s. So we're back on these right-of-ways every between 4 to 6 years. So people are used to seeing crews on the right-of-way. It's typically when you get a new landowner that you might have to take some time to, educate them. But yeah, the crews have, a lot of them are really good at explaining what we're doing on the right-of-way and why we have to do it.
Yeah, which speaks to the educational details and training that you guys provide as a utility to the, I'm assuming, contracted vendors performing the work, and to build that educational benchmark or foundation. Stabilization of the workforce sounds like it's a component of that as well. So it sounds like because of a variety of factors that you have a pretty stable workforce, you would say, in the line clearance side of the world, and that just if you can speak to some of the retention details associated with that, that'd be nice, because I think that that's one of the issues we see in various parts of the country is revolving doors of the contracted resources leads to just completely re-educating the workforce over and over, and you don't ever get that true outcome. But it sounds like that's a pretty stable group that you have in that space.
Yeah, we definitely look out with having a stable workforce for the most part. I mean, obviously there's definitely some changeover, but on transmission, we've been able to, keep those crews going. A lot, we will find additional work outside of the spray season to do some work, or they move to other utilities. So they, if we award the work early enough, they can plan out for the year. And same for sideline crews, we keep them going. We have a really strong safety culture at National Grid, and it's actually respected a lot by our crews. So that, to me, that makes a huge difference. But, at the same time, while it's been great for some of the keeping a lot of these crews around, we're getting less and less people that want to do this work. There's less that want to go out and crawl through the brush or climb trees. So, I mean, as an industry, there's more that I think we need to do, whether that's, equipment wise, that would allow other people to get involved. Maybe it's drones. But we need to look at other advancements that would bring some other people into the industry that typically wouldn't have been there before, because the workforce is definitely, it's beginning to dwindle down. And so changes are definitely needed in order to keep this type of work going. It is a necessity. There's no doubt about it. We don't want to be, mowing and paving our right-of-ways. That's not what we intend to do. But in order to maintain, our IVM program, we need to have the crews out there to do it. And, they need to be licensed applicators. They need to be, professional climbers. So we need all that out there. Some things probably have to change. And in my opinion, I probably think some of that is, some of the technology, going forward.
Yeah. Yep. You're seeing a big change in that here in the last few years as well, just with the advancements of equipment. It's pretty phenomenal. And how do utilities are starting to figure out how could we apply these new pieces of technology or equipment specifically, but utilizing UAS operations with the various sensors to find out what is possible in certain spaces. Can we get bucket trucks to it? If we can't, can we get a tracked giraffe to it? If we can't do that, can we get a tracked bucket truck? Whatever the case may be, to help offset the human resource shortage that's happening, not just within the UVM space, but across a lot of verticals within the service industry.
Yeah, by using some of that technology, you kind of take away from the physical aspect of having to do some of those jobs. And so maybe someone who's more interested in the robotic side of it, well, that's a whole nother group that we can pull in that hadn't been there before. And then if we can get them a dendrology degree of some sort, even better.
Yeah. So out of your research, what are some emerging things you're looking at, or thoughts or ideas? I think you mentioned wind the other day is something that's caught your attention.
Yeah. So there's been a couple of studies that have been coming out recently, and not necessarily in our bio-audit study, but in some other studies that, the company is working on, looking at prevailing winds. How much does that affect? Obviously, winds affect trees falling down. We know that. But can we really track, is it coming from the east, the west, on a certain direction? Is there a certain time of year that we should always be focusing on? Is there certain species that are really more susceptible to some of these wind patterns? I'm just starting to see some studies coming out on this because, there's definitely a different focus between distribution and transmission. Typically, transmission has got a whole buffer of a utility forest behind it, but obviously the consequences of outages on transmission are pretty high, and you're trying to avoid it as much as possible. So, really trying to incorporate some of these other studies, I think is kind of our next step. Like, how is that really affecting our outages? So for us at National Grid, anytime we have an outage, we investigate every time and we track it in our software system. We track the soil type. We track, what affected it. Was it obviously the weather, but also was there something going on with the tree? What's the size of the tree? Are there any other trees in that area that maybe are going to be susceptible to the same issue that we need to do something ahead of time? So taking all that into account, I think because so many utilities actually do track their outage data, this is definitely something that, could be a conjoined group that could probably figure out some of these prevailing winds and how it affects all these tree outages and how we can kind of use all that data together.
Understanding outages is a key component to understanding how do we keep the power on. And
Exactly.
the more you know in that space, the more targeted you can be with your risk modeling. And so I'm really excited to hear that you guys are doing that.
We spend millions and millions and millions to prevent outages, and yet probably the majority of utilities still don't study what causes outages. So I'm glad to hear what you're pursuing that in more detail.
So we talked a lot about transmission and a lot of the unique things that are happening in that space. Is there any of this information or any of these processes, procedures, ideologies kind of trickling down to the distribution side? Just because a lot of people don't realize, like, distribution levels or distribution programs in general are governed at the state level, and then the federal level is governing help through FAC 003 NERC and FERC governing transmission. But there's a lot of cross-pollination, as we kind of alluded to earlier. And what's National Grid kind of doing to help spread those type of ideologies across the enterprise in that space?
Yeah, so for me, I've spent most of my career, pretty much all my career, doing off-road work, whether it's transmission or distribution, but it's off-road work. So there's definitely a lot of crossover when we get into the distribution space as far as, the IVM work that we do there. Obviously, it's tighter right-of-ways. The same program can apply. The company itself is doing a lot more in the satellite arena on our distribution, working on basically optimizing the work plan so that we're pruning trees at the right time in the right year. And we've been implementing that in Massachusetts now for a couple of years. So we tried actually looking at satellite data on the transmission side. And for us, it wasn't quite there yet. So it's actually, I guess, you were talking about trickling down from transmission to distribution. We tried to trickle it up from distribution to transmission. And we tried to really look to see, okay, could we use satellite imagery to do a lot more of, like, essentially what our LiDAR work was doing? We were not at the comfort space yet to do that. Do I think ultimately down the road that will be there and that satellite probably will be what we're using? Yes, I do think we'll be there, which is, to me, at the same time, a little scary too, that fact that we'll be able to get that type of imagery from satellite. I think that's down the road. And so for now, for transmission, we're still sticking with LiDAR and focusing on that. We're dabbling in utilizing LiDAR on the distribution side in certain areas, but obviously not necessarily cost effective at this point. But once again, I only anticipate that that'll probably come down as well.
Yeah, I'm assuming that some of the hesitation with adopting the satellite component on the distribution or the transmission side is just the level of accuracy at this point with the current technology they have in the commercial satellite space. So I think it's plus or minus 30 centimeters, which with LiDAR, we're getting, sub-meter accuracy on those GPS locations and lat longs.
Yep, exactly.
You mentioned pollination, Brian, so I'll follow up on that in a different way. You're part of the Monarch CCAA, is that right? And you have lands
That is correct.
Under that program? No, I was just going to say, anything else you're doing in the pollinator arena? Actually,
our bio audit study started from a pollinator site. When we used to own Rhode Island energy right-of-ways, there was a site down in Rhode Island that we had converted from, I wouldn't say it was a wasted area, but it was an area next to a park. It was on the right-of-way. We had to mow it multiple times a year just in order to keep within the city regulations. So we decided, okay, what happened if we turned this site into a pollinator site? So we actually ended up scarifying the soil, bringing in seed and lime, and getting basically a pollinator site started up there. And it made us realize, okay, this was great to do for this site. The neighborhood liked it. The city liked it. It's not something we could definitely do throughout the whole system because we can't go around scarifying soil everywhere we want to. So that's actually what led us to looking at, okay, what are we already doing on the right of way that brings in pollinators? And that's when we started to realize how much more IVM was affecting the pollinators and was already a treatment type that was helping. And as that evolved, it evolved into the bio audit study. But at the same time, then we were approached about the Monarch CCAA. And as you read through the Monarch CCAA, one of the big components is IVM. Can your company commit to doing IVM on the right of way? And for us, that was an easy win between our New England territory and our upstate New York territory. We've utilizing IVM for so long, we can commit the acres. We are more than willing to commit the acres to that. And you can see the difference on the right of way just by doing that. So for us, pollinators while they weren't tracked necessarily in the beginning, it's always been part of our program because we were doing IVM. And so that's one of the benefits. Once again, we're not very good at promoting that's the benefits of IVM in general, that we're able to have pollinators on the right of way, that we see monarchs out there.
Yeah, pollinator habitat is obviously dwindling. So anywhere we can put more in, it's extremely beneficial. And we're starting to see a lot of utilities start moving towards that realm of management, which is really nice to see, not only on the just transmission, but distribution spaces as well. And promoting that is critical too. To your point about public engagement, those are nice accolades to be able to wear around on your neck, saying we're here to help support the environment, to promote green spaces, while still maintaining a reliable electric service to our customers. And you can have both. I think that the public perception is that's not possible, but it is. And so I'm
Right.
thankful you guys are doing that. I worked with Iris way back in the day on when she was first starting that program up. So I'm really excited to see it.
I was going to say, Brian, actually, the IVM is the best way to get there. So everywhere, it's just such a consistent message we see. It's just like
Exactly.
Mariclaire says, a message we have to get out there.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This is a good opportunity to talk about, some of the things we have going on our right of way, some of the things we got going on in the future. And it's an opportunity to collaborate with other utilities, as they hear stuff to say, hey, we're thinking about doing that, or we want to look into doing something like that. So, we're always willing to help out.
Well, I appreciate your opening the door to other utilities. And I'd like to have you back sometime down the road, and let's follow up, see where it's going, what your new ideas and new findings are, and have more of a conversation.
That sounds fantastic. I would look forward to that.
Thanks for joining us today. Follow us on LinkedIn for updates and to tune in again to the Trees and Lines podcast.